The world did not expect this. In the heart of West Africa, a quiet capital city became the stage for one of the most defiant acts of the 21st century. Burkina Faso, a nation once written off as small and dependent, has just done what few ever imagined possible. With a single order, Captain Ibrahim Traoré told one of the most powerful intelligence agencies on earth to leave his country. And they did. This was not a rebellion fought with guns or missiles. It was a battle of truth, sovereignty, and courage. A confrontation that exposed a secret hidden beneath the soil of Africa for years, and in doing so, shook the foundations of global power. For decades, under the banner of security cooperation, the CIA operated quietly in Burkina Faso. Officially, it was there to help fight terrorism and protect the region. In reality, it was guarding something far more strategic: the interests of the United States itself. While billions of dollars flowed through defense and aid programs, the Burkinabe people continued to struggle for electricity, clean water, and basic schools. Villages sat in darkness while secret bases glowed at night. The contradiction became impossible to ignore. Whispers began spreading. Villagers spoke of fenced-off lands and mysterious foreigners watching movements in silence. Roads were blocked without explanation. But what began as rumors soon became revelation. When President Traoré ordered an investigation, the findings were staggering. Inside the so-called security compound, investigators discovered surveillance drones, satellite receivers, and high-tech listening equipment. Maps showed not only Burkina Faso's gold, manganese, and uranium deposits, but detailed data on African leaders across the continent. What was presented as cooperation was, in truth, a kingdom of control, operating beyond the reach of Burkinabe law. And all of it was funded with billions of US dollars. Traoré didn't hide behind closed doors. He stood before his people, documents in hand, and spoke with unmistakable clarity: this is not a security base. This is a control center. It does not protect Burkina Faso, it monitors and manipulates it. Those words cut through the silence like thunder. For years, foreign interests had operated in the shadows. But now, for the first time, light had been cast on their operations, and it came from a leader unafraid to name the truth. Washington's reaction was swift. Threats of sanctions. Warnings of aid cuts. Over $150 million in US assistance was suddenly at risk. Officials whispered, "Without us, Burkina Faso will collapse." But Traoré's reply was firm, almost poetic in its conviction. Aid that comes with chains is not aid, it is ransom. In that moment, Burkina Faso redrew the meaning of sovereignty. For too long, Africa's independence had been conditioned on obedience, loans tied to policies, aid tied to silence. Now, a young soldier president was breaking that pattern. Then came the ultimatum. The CIA had 48 hours to leave Burkinabe's soil. No negotiations. No secret extensions. The world held its breath. Would the United States challenge this order? Would chaos erupt? But there were no explosions. No standoffs. Only a quiet departure that spoke louder than war. Day by day, the compound emptied. Black SUVs rolled out under secrecy. Helicopters lifted equipment into the Sahel sky. And by the second day, the base once guarded by foreign soldiers stood abandoned. The silence was haunting. What had once symbolized foreign power now stood as proof of African resolve. For ordinary citizens, it was not just a political victory. It was the moment they could point to and say, "This land is ours again." Crowds gathered outside the gates. Some cried. Others sang. Flags waved not as symbols of protest, but of rebirth. Freedom had finally taken shape, visible, tangible, undeniable. But then came the second shock. Inside the deserted halls, investigators found what the CIA left behind: racks of servers, hard drives, and surveillance data that would stun the entire continent. The files revealed high-resolution geological maps of Burkina Faso's mineral wealth: gold, uranium, manganese, resources valued in the billions. But that wasn't all. There were dossiers on citizens, teachers, journalists, and even parliamentarians labeled as anti-American. These weren't enemies of peace. They were patriots who questioned foreign control. Even more alarming, the data showed that phone calls from across Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Chad had been intercepted. The CIA's reach was not local, it was continental. In an unprecedented move, Traoré made the evidence public. The documents were declassified and broadcast on national television. Screens across Africa lit up with maps stamped with CIA seals, intercepted logs, and internal memos. And just like that, whispers turned into awakening. In Bamako, protesters demanded the inspection of all foreign bases. In Niamey, lawmakers called for transparency in defense contracts. Even the African Union, often cautious and diplomatic, issued a statement calling for an investigation into foreign intelligence operations across the continent. A new wave was building, one not of violence but of awareness. Western media tried to contain the damage. Some called it exaggeration. Others dismissed it as political theater. But the details were too precise to ignore. The question echoed across African streets and studios alike: if a single base in Burkina Faso could host such a vast surveillance operation, how many more exist across the continent? For the first time, African nations were asking not for permission, but for answers. Then came the turning point. As the US froze aid, Africa responded with solidarity. Ghana and Nigeria offered bilateral support. The African Development Bank launched emergency financing to stabilize Sahel economies. Instead of isolation, Burkina Faso found regional embrace. What Washington intended as punishment became a badge of honor. The message was clear: sovereignty might cost comfort, but it earns respect. Yes, the short-term pain was real. Projects slowed, and contracts froze. But something more powerful began to rise: trust. The Burkinabe people saw a leader who would rather face economic pressure than sell his country's soul. For the first time in decades, independence was not a word in textbooks, it was an experience. Farmers spoke of pooling resources. Students debated how to build a self-reliant economy. The diaspora sent money not as charity, but as investment. The nation was waking up, and the continent was watching. Then, in a move rich with symbolism, Traoré announced that the abandoned CIA base would be reborn. Not as a fortress, but as a center for African youth leadership and civic education. The same walls that once housed surveillance servers would now host classrooms, debates, and training for young Africans determined to defend their nation's futures. One wing would become a museum, displaying confiscated servers, intercepted maps, and foreign documents, reminders that freedom must be guarded every day. Where once Africa was watched, now Africa would learn. In his speech at the inauguration, Traoré said quietly, "I was afraid, but I feared silence more than anything else." Those words echoed far beyond Burkina Faso. They reached the streets of Bamako, the classrooms of Accra, the airwaves of Nairobi. They reminded a continent that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the refusal to let fear decide our destiny. Today, the empty compound in Ouagadougou stands as more than reclaimed land. It is a monument to defiance, proof that dignity can stand taller than dollars. That even a small, landlocked nation with a modest GDP can shake the arrogance of a superpower. Burkina Faso may not have the wealth of nations or the luxury of comfort. But it has something rarer: the will to say no when the world expects submission. The expulsion of the CIA from Burkina Faso will be remembered as the day Africa reminded the world of its worth. A day when sovereignty was not begged for, but exercised. And a day that asks a haunting question: if one small nation can reclaim its freedom, what happens when the entire continent decides to do the same? Because in the end, power is not measured in dollars or weapons. It is measured in dignity, and in the courage of a people who finally decide to stand on their own feet. Africa's story is still being written, but this chapter, the day Burkina Faso stood tall, may one day be remembered as the moment the continent began to truly rise.